Black History Month each February celebrates the contributions African Americans have made to our country, and a Minneapolis museum highlights those contributions in our state. The Minnesota African American Heritage Museum and Gallery is relatively new, and it's the only museum of its kind in the state. In this week's Finding Minnesota, John Lauritsen shows us how the museum is celebrating the past and looking forward to the future.
For those of us who wanted a museum, on my part, I couldn't let go of the idea. We're kind of the 365-day Black history story from Minnesota.
For Coventry Cowens, it was surprising how little people knew about Black history in the land of 10,000 lakes. It bothered her so much that she and others decided the only way to educate was to provide a place to learn.
If you read the guest book, they'll say, well, I didn't know that about my neighbors. These are things that your neighbors have been doing for many years.
The museum on Penn Avenue in North Minneapolis is essentially a walking history, from contemporary artists to people like George Bonga, considered the first person of African descent to be born in the territory that later became Minnesota.
And he became a fur trader and spoke 3 languages.
There's a tribute to Black men and women from the North Star State who wanted to serve their country during the Great World Wars, even though the military was segregated at the time.
That means this soldier saw battle.
One display highlights the Great Migration that began in 1900, when African Americans were recruited to come and work in factories, farms, and mills in Minnesota and other northern states.
Before that, about 80% of African Americans lived in the South.
The museum even has a green book that helped Black travelers find food and lodging as they ventured north.
Sometimes those roads from Mississippi, Alabama, Indiana were not that safe traveling long distances.
For Coventry, perhaps the most important exhibit centers on Black innovation. Architect Clarence Wigington is responsible for several recognizable buildings in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
And this is Nicollet Island, the building on Nicollet Island.
And then there's Dr. Retha Clark King, who still lives in the Twin Cities.
We call her one of those hidden figures. She invented tubing for the Apollo 11 mission, space mission.
It's a good thing to have it here and stapled in North Minneapolis.
Keith Murray is one of more than 5,000 people who have visited so far.
I think it's real important because it teaches the history and where they came from and where they at now and where they want to go.
And what they want most of all is to use the past as a guide for the future.
We're trying to tell a story that especially children and school children can understand.
In Minneapolis, John Lauritsen, WCCO 4 News.
The museum is located on the 4th floor at the intersection of Penn and Plymouth in North Minneapolis. It's run entirely by volunteers. Admission is free, but they do encourage donations. We have a link to the museum's hours on our website. I know of a person or place that John should know about? You can send him your Finding Minnesota ideas at WCCO.com/links.